Okay, so this is my third presentation. As I said in the very first presentation, we're first going to lay the moral foundation of capitalism, and then we're going to discuss the all-out assault on reality, what that means, and then the last session we're going to address our action steps. What actions must we start taking? For those of you who don't know me, my name is John Immel. Once upon a time, many, many years ago, I had a blog called Spiritual Tyranny, and I wrote a book, Blight in the Vineyard, Exposing the Roots, Myths, and Emotional Torment of Spiritual Tyranny. I am a capitalist, so this is on sale on Amazon for $23.99 or some such. Really good. If you are struggling, if you have come out of the New Calvinist movement, struggling with trying to figure out how to put your life back together, this is a great place for you to start. It will give you the framework within which you were tyrannized. It will explain why that is a framework of tyranny. And then the last chapter, or last couple chapters, are dedicated to helping you get out from underneath what that means. So now we get to talk about the war on reality. I'm going to show you 3 slides. I want you to hold your thoughts. I'm going to let you study in all 3. And I want you to tell me what they have in common. Good. Next slide. For those of you online, I'm going to read it to you. This woman is a Brooklyn College professor by the name of Lori Rubel. She teaches math education. The idea that math, or data, is culturally neutral or in any way objective is a myth. I am ready to move on with that understanding. Who's coming with me? Along with the, of course, math is neutral because 2 + 2 = 4 trope, and the related and creepy math is pure and protect math reeks of white supremacist patriarchy. I'd rather think on nurturing people and protecting the planet with math in service to them goals. Now, there's a lot here. I don't expect you to be able to read all this, so focus on this one right here. For those of you online, this is from Talking About Race, NMAAHC. This is a national museum. I don't remember what that whole acronym stands for, but this is something that's being put out about aspects and assumptions of whiteness and white culture. Now, it touches on rugged individualism and family structure, but right here, this one says, emphasis on scientific method. The 3 bullet points are objective, rational, linear thinking, cause and effect relationships, quantitative emphasis. Now, pop quiz. What do all these have in common? Somebody else first. Thoughts?
Well, the premise is false.
The premise is what?
False.
What is the premise?
That, well, all of that is true. That violence is not violence, and that silence is a form of violence, and all of that, the premise is, it just struck me as all being false.
Why is it false?
I don't know, but I
Andy?
know up here and in my heart it's false.
Well, those three examples there alone they're a contradiction.
Okay.
First of all, they're a contradiction. But the other two that you showed, the other two slides, that's what I talked about in my first session. That's critical theory. But the goal is to get you to accept a different reality.
Bingo. That is exactly what all these have in common. Every single last one of these examples. So, fiery, but mostly peaceful protest. Contradiction, right? Silence is not violence. Violence has a very specific definition, and so does silence. I mean, the alliteration notwithstanding, they're not related. Yes, men can have periods. We need to talk about them. No, men can't have periods. That is something unique to the female part of the human species. This is a more brazen effort, but it's still fundamentally the same thing. She is defying people to accept reality as such. And the last one here is an emphasis on the scientific. Notice that this emphasis on the scientific method, objective thinking, cause and effect relationship, quantitative emphasis, causality is a byproduct of the nature of existence. But they're trying to pretend that there is no causality. I only invented it because I'm white. All of these are designed to drive us towards the alternate reality. Now, for the new people who are watching this, I addressed this at length in my first session. I have deliberately faded out the background of the other stuff, but this web right here, everything you see in the background, these are the 5 elements of tyranny. Anytime you see a tyranny erected, they all rely on the same 5 fundamental elements, and they're all in dynamic tension. The reason they are in a web here is because they're not linear as such. They are held together in this constant tug. And so the 5 elements are abolition of ambition, universal guilt, dictated good, incompetent masses, collective conformity. I am very proud to say this is my addition to the world of philosophy. No one else came up with this. I did this. That was my Trump imitation. See how I did that? I'm great. So. All of this, but I want you to know that all of this is in service to defining a specific reality. All of it. All of these peripheral arguments, all these peripheral points are designed to drive forward for the right to dictate what reality looks like. Now, I covered this a couple of years ago. It was a 2000, when did I do how to debate a Calvinist? When did I do that? 16? 17? So in that one, Calvinists reserve the right for themselves to define reality front and back. All of their arguments are in service to their authority to compel that whatever reality they want. Everything that we just talked about there is an effort to redefine the nature of reality. And this is directly related to Andy's critical theory. What is that reality? White people are somehow epistemologically, metaphysically evil, and therefore racist, and because they're racist, they're in the process of oppressing everyone. And how do they do that? Well, every expression of the nature of their life and their culture is about this oppression.
And to take that one step further, the point that I made, and this is where it goes into this is where it ties into human depravity and church orthodoxy. The minute you object to that, you've just proven what they're accusing you of. Because you are trying to counter that argument with ration, logic, reason, facts. And the mere fact that you're doing that, you've just demonstrated your whiteness, your oppression, or take to the church. The minute you object to something the pastor says from the pulpit, you've just demonstrated your depravity.
Right. So if you object to the critical theory that whiteness has anything to do with racial oppression, you've by definition demonstrated your depravity by virtue of that action. If you go to church and you say, hey, pastor, I just heard you say something that I don't agree with, and he's been preaching to you original sin, well, he just says you're arrogant, and you by default fall into that same category, which is exactly what this is for. So, universal guilt. I am universally guilty no matter what I do. It is a metaphysical state. So, why do they do this?
Why?
Here's why this is important. I was asking a question, stalling for time while I tried to figure out what I want to say next. So, another pop quiz. I told you there was a lot of them today. If a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound?
Who cares?
Andy says, who cares?
Yes.
Susan, you said what?
Yes.
Yes.
I say yes.
Yes. Why?
'Cause-
the tree cracks, it's the natural result.
Actually, that's right. Yes, because the sound is a byproduct of the identity of the branch and the component parts of the ground acting in accord with their nature. Notice what this question really presumes. Do humans create reality or not?
Right.
And the answer to that question is to be
No.
discussed. The answer to that question is no. We're going to discuss it here. So, here's why this is. So let me ask you this. What is reality then?
Yeah.
Reality. A
So-
equals A, B equals B.
You're good. You're a good Aristotelian. What? Who said what? Say it louder, please.
Oh, go ahead. Are you getting at reality is our perception?
That is one way to do it. Yes.
Well, reality is what we live with every day around us, the rules of nature, the rules that are imposed on us by our government, by our businesses.
Excellent. Yes.
But then we also have our own reality. And so I feel like we create some of our own reality. Do we create reality? No.
Excellent distinction. Let's talk about it in this exact lane. In the world of human existence, there are only two options: the primacy of existence and the primacy of consciousness. The primacy of existence is existence exists. Everything you see is, and it is independent of consciousness as such. It actually doesn't matter if a human ever perceives it or not, it exists. The primacy of consciousness says is that the consciousness creates reality. The primacy of consciousness says existence is the byproduct of man's consciousness. How many times have you heard things like this? Perception is reality. Or, we make our own reality. These are both primacy of consciousness ideas. However, perception is not reality any more than the sensation on your skin can create the sun, moon, and stars. Man's senses are his only direct cognitive contact with reality. Man's perception is his only source of information. But this is the baseline of interaction with existence. Our senses are that baseline. But senses do not conceptualize existence. The nasty odor does not magically become a skunk because the nose smelled. The nose smelled the odor, and the mind correlated the smell with the other factors, the black fur, the white stripe, and a host of other perceptions, and then integrated those perceptions into the concept skunk. We make our own reality. Now, don't trip over this crucial distinction. Consciousness does not create versus consciousness that has causative power in existence. While it is true that our consciousness has causal power within existence, in other words, volition, we can make choices, we can act, we can cause things to happen. We can shape the world with equally important reactions and incorporated into the reactions of the world. But we are not impotent. Mother, come on, John, read. While it is true that our consciousness has causal power with existence, we can shape our world, and equally important, our reaction to the world. We are not impotent beings on the waves of determinism, but rather individuals who can exert their identity with causal equation. Fancy way of saying, I'm an autonomous being who has the ability to impact the world, to initiate causality within the world. But this is not the same thing as me creating reality with my existence. And the problem with the primacy of consciousness equation is unrestrained subjectivism. So if the mind or the consciousness is what creates the reality, the question then is, whose consciousness creates that reality? Now there are two options. One is solipsism. In other words, I am the only existing thing known to exist. The problem with that is, then if I'm the only thing that exists, who am I talking to when I'm talking to Susan? Well, that collapses on its face. But the one that is actually more insidious and has gotten actually much more traction is the question of whose consciousness is responsible for creating reality. And there are two options. The first one has historically been God. God is the one who creates reality with his consciousness, and then man is compelled, metaphysically, to accept God's creation. Well, of course, the next question is, which one? The Christian God in America? That seems rather obvious. We say, oh yeah, of course, that one. But the resident Muslims among us? No, not so much. Allah. So we end up with the fundamental fight being, which God is responsible for the creation of reality? And since man has no ability by definition, because consciousness as such has no correlation, we don't build that consciousness, we have to first find a way to discover which God does it. And that's a fundamental impossibility. All religious wars are based on this fundamental flaw. Man has no rational capacity to decide which God is the right one. Without an objective yardstick to decide the objective yardstick without reason, whose consciousness is best suited for determining reality, and that only means the deciding factor in that context is violence. Who is willing to bring the most violence to compel? The second option, and this is what Karl Marx did, he took primacy of consciousness and said, God doesn't exist. Who then is responsible for determining the consciousness of society? That became the government. The government was responsible for determining whose was the plumb line of reality. Well, we all know what that ends up looking like. Every place Marxism has been put into power, it becomes a slaughter fest. If God is the one determining reality, the one question we must answer is, Kingdom of God, which one? If it's Karl Marx or the socialist paradise, the workers' paradise, the reality is defined by the state. In both instances, it doesn't matter the arguments. They all revolve around the same arguments to produce the exact same assault on reality. I think I misnumbered my pages. I did. So what then is the solution to this conundrum? If the primacy of consciousness leaves man adrift without the ability to identify the nature of his own existence, what then is the solution? And that is the primacy of existence. So I'm going to talk to you briefly about Aristotle, and this is a very brief, very high-level review. I talk about Aristotle at length in, I think, 2014, and then again in 2017. Aristotle's achievements in the scope of human existence really it is nearly impossible to give it an effective measure. If you look around this room right this minute, everything that you see that has been created and developed by man is a byproduct of Aristotle's discovery of reality. Prior to Aristotle, reality as a concept did not exist. And the most obvious manifestation of that is Plato and his forms, and man looking at reality, who's looking at a shadow in a cave, totally disassociated from real reality, which was in the world of forms. Every philosophical system that has relegated reality to another dimension and man to a material dimension has stifled humanity to the nth degree. Aristotle showed up and identified and realized, no, this is not true. Reality exists, and man is fully capable of mastering the nature of reality. And so this, for us in the modern age, we're like, okay, yeah, of course. But the reality is that we are only heirs to this, to Aristotle's thinking, because of the Enlightenment. Earlier in the downtime between my presentations today, we talked about the emergence of Aristotelian thought in Western thought, and that came through St. Thomas Aquinas. From the Dark Ages were dominated by a cultural psychosis unknown before. The Dark Ages were dark on principle. People suffered on principle. People feared on principle. St. Thomas Aquinas reintroduces Aristotle and thus reality back into the minds of men. And within about 400 years of that reintroduction, the Enlightenment had taken off. Not long after that, the Industrial Revolution. And every benefit that we are enjoying today is a direct derivative of Aristotle's thought.
Okay, so prior, there was this de-emphasis of empirical study, right? There was a lack of science, at least in Western culture, because what was it going to, if man can't ascertain reality, why would he bother with empirical study?
Correct.
Right?
Well,
Which means
when nature, and historically the real position has always been nature is somehow holy, and therefore man is somehow forbidden from investigating it. And that first shows up prior to the book of Genesis. The cultures prior to that. And one of the crucial evolutions in thought from then, in Genesis chapter 3, the creation story, was really designed to change the dynamic between existence as somehow holy and uninvestigatable and something that was in fact just existence. And man's place in it was above it. This was an evolution of thought. When we finally move forward in the history of thought, when we finally get to Plato, Plato is still predominantly espousing that same fundamental premise, that nature is somehow, we can't investigate it because we're really not we're not capable of investigating it. Aristotle shows up on the scene and says, no, wait a minute, not true. We have the ability, man is by definition part of existence, but his real capacity is to judge and effectively understand existence. This is what gives birth to science as such. It's not something that's set apart from me. I'm forbidden to actually look into it. In actual fact, the way I understand it is by studying it. Well, through the Dark Ages, we had this massive regression. From Augustine until effectively St. Thomas Aquinas, man was effectively forbidden on pretty much every level in investigation. And the only place where you saw that start to subside was every place Aristotle was introduced back into the minds of men. And this is why Aristotle's contribution to Western thought is massive.
Well, and the church, that's because the church was in control of everything.
That's
the
correct.
church was in control of thought. Because so if under the pretense of using scripture, if it wasn't in the scripture, which really meant if the church didn't sanction it,
Right.
you weren't allowed to ask questions about it or investigate it.
Correct.
Okay, and look what happened as soon as Galileo built his telescope and turned it,
Right.
turned it to the heavens. The church had a
Lost its
hissy fit
lost its ever-loving mind.
because how dare you investigate things outside of the sanctioning of what the church says?
Correct. We are all sons and daughters of the enlightened because Aristotle, we are all sons and daughters of the era of the Enlightenment, and indeed we are in his debt, and there is no way to calculate how deep that debt is. He discovered reality and what is required by man to grasp it. So we're not going to do a huge delve into Aristotelian thought, but this is the foundation. Everything that he taught rests on these axioms. Go ahead and read that for a minute. I'll read for the people online here in a minute. If, however, a definition, e.g., man, horse, were not limited, but one were to say that the word has an infinite number of meanings, obviously, reasoning would be impossible. For not to have one meaning is to have no meaning. And if words have no meaning, our reasoning with one another, and indeed with ourselves, has been annihilated. For it is impossible to think of anything if we do not think of one thing. Here's a summary of what he said. The behavior of a particular is defined by its nature. And a particular would be, say, a man, a horse, A. The essential characteristic of a particular are what define its identity. It's one thing. It's unique unto itself.
Mm-hmm.
The essence of each thing is unique to that thing.
Mm-hmm.
The law of identity is the axiom, and the next two parts of this axiom are the corollaries. Go ahead and read this, and I'll read for the people online here in a minute.
They can read it, by the way.
Oh, they can?
Mm-hmm. Easily.
It is impossible then that being a man, in quotes, should mean precisely not being a man. And it will not be possible to be and not be the same thing. But the point in question is not this, whether the same thing can at the same time be and not be a man in name, but whether it can be in fact. A must be A. A cannot be B. It must be one thing and one thing only. This is the law of the excluded middle. But on the other hand, there cannot be an intermediate between contradictories. But in one subject, we must either affirm or deny in any one predicate. This is clear in the first place, if we define what is the true and what is the false. The identity of A must in fact be the identity of A. The particulars of A must never contradict. For A to maintain its identity, there can be no middle compromise, something that is not A. This is the foundation of every cognitive human success. If I cannot successfully determine the difference between that and that, I'm lost. If I cannot decide that this and this are entirely different things and successfully categorize those different things, I am lost.
John, taking that one step further, even if you have two identical of the same thing, each one of those is still distinct in and of themselves.
Well, and this is the distinction between the entity. We have chairs in here that are similar, if you will, but that is different than the concept chair.
Right, well what I'm saying, even if I have two of the exact, like that chair and that chair, they're exactly the same.
Mhm.
Okay, but that doesn't mean we identify them as a chair because there's some concept of chair up here or not. It's like, while these two chairs may be identical, they are not the same chair.
You're correct.
Right.
See, I've argued, whether you agree with it or not, that this is the exact same metaphysic that you see in Genesis 1. God creates, I'm just throwing things around, God creates a cow and says, this is a cow. Well, I ought to be more accurate. He created light and he said, this is light. He even gets man involved in that and lets man name the animals.
Actually, I want to echo what you just said. The naming of the animals, I think, is man's epistemological effort.
Right.
I think that's what God was doing. That naming event is God putting this
Right.
in action, letting Adam conceptualize specifically the identity of what he was going to observe in the world.
Right.
So fast forward to the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not bear false witness. Pause for a moment and think what that requires.
You have to know truth.
You have to know truth. And your mind can't, in other words, you have to know what truth is. In other words, you have to have a plumb line in your own head, truth, lie. And you have to understand the distinction of volition. In other words, I can say, hey, that's green, those online, that wall is green, knowing full well, conceptually, that wall is red.
And not just any truth, objective truth.
Objective truth.
Which means, yes, there is an actual truth there that is.
And the source of that truth is man's capacity to correctly grasp the reality within which he inhabits.
Right. And the literary version of all of this, the literary version of all of this is the historical grammatical method, or what we call hermeneutic. Okay? That's the literary version.
Of Bible interpretation. Is that what you're talking about?
Right. But that is not the hermeneutic of the church.
No, that is not the whole.
Now,
that is
you
not-
ask, and that's documented. That's black and white history.
Sure.
Okay? That's direct quote stuff. But you ask 99.999% of all church-going Christians if the historical grammatical method or hermeneutic is what is used to interpret the Bible, and they will emphatically say yes. And it's absolutely not true.
That's probably because you're talking to the 1% who actually knows the distinction you're making.
Right.
I'm guessing 97.3% don't even know what that means.
Well, there's that too. Yeah.
So here's the bottom line. Reality, existence is the great arbiter and vindicator and judge. The more man acts in accord with reason and reason's judgment on reality, he excels. The further away he drifts, the further into psychosis he travels, the greater his suffering, poverty, and misery. Without an objective reality, man is set adrift and his mind is anchored to nothing. That mind is ripe for anyone to tell him what's true. And this is why we are seeing such a massive assault on reality. Everything that we discussed early on, the first few 3 slides, the reason there is an orchestrated and determined effort to undermine reality and objectivity as such is because they know it will unhinge the mind and make people extraordinarily vulnerable. This is why the political left is hell-bent on destroying reality as such. They must cut the moorings of man from reality. And we're not just talking about a few people who are just crazy. This is a formal effort. What she is advocating here in her grammatically or disastrous tweet, she is making a formal effort to reject reality as such.
Right.
This is a formal effort to actually destroy the concept of objectivity,
Right.
cause and effect relationships, and quantitative emphasis. In other words, the ability to calculate the world, to measure the world, to understand the world in which you live. Silence isn't violence, They are two separate things entirely. Men are not women. And the whole transgender movement, the sexual dysphoria that we're actually seeing, this is all aberrations of sanity. But here's the problem. Even though I've just said that, the chances that I will suffer public consequence for saying that out loud means the force is being brought on me to conform my mind to insanity. America is being compelled down the path to societal psychosis. Every culture that has tripped down this path has collapsed absolutely. It's on purpose and it's intentional. And it must be resisted at all cost. A little known piece of history at the rise of National Socialism is that the National Socialist Party, specifically its leaders, Hitler, who was their Minister of Propaganda? What's his name? Goebbels. They specifically set out to destroy reason as such. Because they knew a mass of people entirely unmoored from their judgment would not judge them, would not find them in error, and would follow dictatorial decree. This same methodology was used by Mao in the Great Revolution in China. This same methodology was used by Pol Pot in the rise of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. Every socialist tyrannical overthrow specifically sets out to destroy man's relationship to his mind and his mind from the world. Because if they can succeed in that, you have no ability to resist. Conversely, men who are effective at judging reality are nearly impossible to tyrannize. They are self-possessed men and women. They are confident men and women. And they are people who refuse to bow to the tyranny. What we are seeing currently working out in our culture is as dangerous a poison as that has ever been initiated in American life.
Well, just look at how easily they got people to walk around with masks on their face everywhere they go.
Yeah.
Well, those are symptomatic outcomes of the broader concern, because how many people don't trust their own mind to judge reality? The numbers are available for anyone who will, but how many people put a mask on their face because, well, I'm not sure, I'll just hedge my bets, even though there is no science behind the value of a mask up against preventing the spread of virus.
And if you ask them, if you go up and ask them straight up, how long do you intend to keep wearing that mask?
Yeah.
They either don't have an answer, or they'll say, well, I'm waiting for the vaccine, or I'm waiting until some authority tells me it's okay not to.
Right.
And this is how far down the path of abolishing reality and man's connection with reality we've really actually gotten. And this is what we must fight. This is, I don't know, I don't typically care to be cliche, but this is for all the marbles. If we abandon reality here, and we abandon, and remember, in the last session we talked directly about this, man's ability to prosper himself, to live, is directly related to his ability to judge reality successfully. His ability to produce is directly tied to his ability to judge reality correctly. His ability to prosper and grow is directly tied to that. If we let them destroy reality as such, if they have the ability to bring political, governmental consequence, because I won't accept that men can have periods, they can rewrite the world however they choose and keep compelling people to do whatever they want, and they will. And this is why we must fight. Thank you.
Okay. Any comments or questions?
Comments?
Questions?
Yeah, go.
I don't get this.
You don't get which thing?
So what is this aspects and assumptions of white? So is that something you made up?
No. This is, actually, I didn't do a good job here because I The people that put this out are the NAAHC.
Who's that?
And Andy, could you really quick Google that acronym? I think it's the national. I think it's a part of the National Museum. I think this is actually a byproduct of our government. I think.
National Museum of African American History and Culture.
Okay.
It is that great big ugly building they just built in Washington D.C.
So what I don't understand why this is wrong. I don't get this.
You don't get why I think this paper is wrong, or why
Yeah.
white culture is wrong.
No, why the paper? Explain that. I'm not
So,
reading it.
okay, so their premise here is that everything that you see down through here
Yeah.
is really a byproduct of white worldview. So I am only a rugged individual because I believe, because whiteness has told me that's true.
Oh, okay.
I only believe in the scientific method because whiteness has told me that's true.
It's a white
The
It's a
families.
white
It's
concept.
a-
Well, I can't, first of all, I can't read it.
Yeah,
I
it's
gotta
tough
get
space.
Closer, yeah. Oh,
And so all of these things that
Okay.
you see here are byproducts of quote unquote white history and
I
white
get it now.
ideas.
Okay.
And so they're not valid because they're true, they're actually invalid because they're just a byproduct of somebody who looks like me.
Well, even, look at the bottom of it, Protestant work ethic. They believe that because the white man says hard work is the key to success. I mean, that's nuts.
I actually have this, and so you don't have to necessarily take this picture. This is one of two, there's actually two, this is just the first part. I decided, since it was so dense, not to overwhelm you here, but the important,
Self-reliance, look at that.
I know, and these are all
Can't even
somehow
work for
white
ourselves.
ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
White's been replaced with sin. To put it in biblical context, really what the Bible says is that the essence of all sin is a desire to control others. So if you go to Genesis 4, 6, and 7, you've got the first gospel presentation there to Cain by God himself. And he says, Cain, sin is like an animal crouching at the door, and it's on its haunches, ready to attack you and devour you. But you must master it. So in other words, instead of allowing sin's desire to master you, you must in reality master sin. Okay? So what the Bible really teaches is the essence of all sin is a desire to control others. Okay?
And in that context, it would be to control Abel.
Right. And so the whole thing with sin being defined by breaking God's law, that's something I'm not going to get into. That's really a covenant in which sin is imputed to, is part of the new birth. But I'm not going to get into that. Right now I want to focus on the how the Bible defines sin. So it goes like this. If you jump over now to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 55 and 56, Paul says the power of sin is the law. That's a pretty bizarre statement. But what he's saying there is that the law condemns you, okay? And sin gains its power through its ability to condemn. Because it goes like this: since you suck, since you can't understand reality, and my wife and I do some marriage counseling, and we see this all the time in marriages. Both partners come in, and it's a big long sin list that is a case for why she ought to do everything I say because she's dumb and I'm smart. See, here's the proof. Here's all the stuff she does wrong. Right here, big long list. Okay, so It's condemnation. Sin uses condemnation to tell you, since you suck and since you're a loser, you need to do, and in another respect, you don't even understand reality. You need to do what I say. So this is all a control game. And the sin here is being what? White.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And so it's a power play is what it is. Okay.
I just can't.
Yeah. You know, and they even go as far to say, and he had an excellent, this goes hand in glove with what you did in your first session when you outlined critical race theory. Okay? By virtue of the fact that you're white, you're like this whether you know it or not. Okay? And of course, that's part and parcel exactly with the doctrine of total depravity.
Hey, John,
Yes.
that page has been scrubbed from their website.
Oh.
Oh,
Well,
Wow.
I have it, so,
Yeah. I found the image, but when you click on the link to go to that page on their website,
mhm.
it's gone. Because so many people have been writing against this, talking about how racist this is.
right.
Yeah, it's
I
reversed.
just did a Google search for that particular, the only place I can find that image is on other websites that have critiqued this.
Mhm.
But if you go to the actual NMAHC page, it's been scrubbed from their page.
Yeah, the second page actually specifically and overtly denounces Western philosophy and specifically Aristotle.
Right,
Oh my goodness.
right.
Any other questions? Did we answer your question?
Yeah.
Will?
Yeah.
Anything else? Awesome, guys. Thanks. This was my third session. Ready for the fireworks tomorrow for my fourth.
Okay.
Very good, John.
Thank you.
So here's the image. There's the web page. If you go to click on that, page not found.
Okay.
Interesting.
It says, sorry, you may be lost, let's get you home.
And what makes me, I was thinking about this, is that, like, we see this in these younger generations, kids. Those 9 kids, I'm thinking of the family that we have. I was telling just reading his post, one of the posts of the spouse that came, and him just criticizing my fence and I thought, here are these kids who, they have doctorate degrees, all 9 of them, not all, 2 of them do, and
Masters, some of them have masters.
all 9 children have been educated in a Nazarene university, higher education.
Yeah.
And they, all 9, are against Trump, against the Republic, and are supporting
Well,
the Biden parents.
And part of that comes from this idea of, I think, being socialistic is like taking care of the poor. I think that is an emphasis that a lot of people with that buy into socialism, that is the hook and bait that draws them in. But yet, they've not really studied it, and they really don't know what they're pulled into and what it means. They only have this mindset, oh yeah, we should be mindful, this is a Mark Cummings thing so much. You know, we need to take care of the poor.
And
We
that's,
need to share.
yes,
We need to do
individually,
this and that.
not the church,
Yeah.
or, I mean, yes, the church, but not the government.
Yeah, the
And
government
it
cannot
should be
dictate that.
what God shows me to help the poor. it's never should have been the government to take care of people.
Well, look at the church. Look at the church.
And the church should have been doing this.
You tithe,
Yeah,
you give all your money to us, and we'll decide how it's distributed.
right, and I don't do that now.
You know,
I
Yeah.
tithe,
Yeah.
but I tithe all over the world.
I tithe all over the place
And-
All
myself.
over the world.
most
Yeah.
churches have a big problem with that.
Yeah.
Your first responsibility is that 10% going to us first.
Yeah, I know.
And I pastored in a lot of churches that chastised their members for tithing outside of the church. Well, you know, our bills aren't being met, you know,
Yeah.
so,
I will say that, there are some big churches around that, that actually take their tithe and they don't spend it on themselves, that distribute it to a number of local organizations,
Uh-huh.
national organizations, and this and that. And, a lot of those places I even support myself and give
Yeah.
a part to. I'm given to the same places a lot of them are. So it's not like, oh, I'm spending all this money for the salary of the staff or
And
building a
buildings.
bigger building.
Yeah.
No, a lot of them really do tithe a portion of what they're increasing. I'm not gonna say a lot.
yeah.
There are some mega churches that I know around here that do that. Some big churches that do that. Anyway,
Did you shut
but
off
I'm
the stream, by
not
the way?
defending. I'm just
No.
saying.
Because I forgot to.
I
That's,
did.
that's
I
the
did.
mindset.
I'll take care of
Is
that.
that it is, a responsibility that they ought to take. Yeah, and I think that's done. And with my giving, I am support. If we all,
My 10%, a lot of it, it's going all over.
If
to
you look
care
at
for
the,
poor
if you
people.
look at the original intention of giving in the New Testament churches, the first instances you see it was in Acts chapter 2 and Acts chapter 4, and it was nothing more than a means to provide for the members of the individual
That's
fellowships
right.
themselves.
You're right. You're right.
Okay, because if you think of what the culture was at the time in the first century, first of all, the early church was all Jews. It wasn't until probably about 20 years after the ascension of Christ where Christianity first starts to go out to the Gentiles
Right.
because of Paul. And even when Paul first went out, he would always go to a Jewish synagogue first. So even in his very first missionary journey with him and Barnabas, even when they went to those other Greek cities, they were seeking out Jews because they were going to Jewish synagogues. And what they found out is that the Jews rejected what they were saying, but there were Gentile converts within those synagogues. In other words, Gentiles who had converted to Judaism, who heard what Paul had to say, and they were the ones that were persuaded. And they went out, they'd bring their Gentile friends with them to hear what Paul and Barnabas had to say. And all of a sudden, all these Gentiles now start responding, and the Jews started getting jealous.
Yeah, they didn't like that.
So